So, welcome to the Blind Ambition podcast with Jack Kelly. And today, our special guest, Jeffrey Schwartz. And what I want to do for Jeff, this guy is amazing. 30 years of management consulting, and he's an expert in what's going on in the future of work, what trends are happening. So, just to start it up, Jeff, what are you seeing right now, particularly in the white collar market? Because it seems a little challenging for people. What's your take on it so far?
Yeah, so let me talk about trends for a minute. And then what
Okay.
I'm also going to turn the discussion to, Jack, is
Mhm.
that what trends really are choices and decisions that we need to make. But I'll start with the trends, right?
Okay.
So we've been on a roller coaster, and it's going faster and faster.
Mhm.
But when we think about white collar work, I'm going to also describe it as different kinds of knowledge work. If I were to sort of succinctly look at the last 30
Mhm.
years, what's happened was, in the 80s and the 90s, we basically standardized processes. We moved as much as we could to these ERP, big enterprise software systems. We tried to optimize workflows. And then we focused the work that we did, the white collar work, if you will, into communications, relationship building, and different kinds of analysis. That's really where we were focusing the white collar workforce. And then in the last 20, 25 years, we went to the internet, to the web, to the digital revolution, to the AI revolution, to the Gen AI revolution, right? That's the fast history. And a lot of that work that we had set aside, in effect, for the white collar workforce, the communications piece, the analysis piece, the relationship piece, is being done increasingly by the technologies that we're working with. So if I were to summarize the trends for the white collar
Mhm.
workforce, I think I'd focus on three things. One, what's happening today is as slow as it's ever going to be. This is slow. Right? It's simply going to be faster and faster, right? There's no question about that. When we look at the last 2 years as what's happened with Gen AI, when Gen AI is just barely 2 years old. It was 2 years old November
Mhm.
30th, 2022. And we first got ChatGPT 3.0, and now we're on variants beyond 4.0, and then we'll have 5.0. So it's going to move faster. What's disruptive about it is that everyone who's in the white collar workforce will be working with and next to a smart machine, right? So there's a trend around super jobs. How do we use technology as individual workers? There's a trend around super teams. How do we combine people and technology and put them on the same team? And in order to do this, we need to move beyond optimizing the current processes. We need to move beyond a sort of substitution mindset to people do it or technology do it. But the big trend really is in redesigning work, right? So if we're going to go faster, we're going to have more automation, we're going to be working with technology, and it's going to be disruptive. These are the trends.
Mhm.
What this leads us to is to ask, what do we want to have happen? How do we want to craft how people work with technology so that it is better for people as employees, and it's better for us as customers, and it's better for us in terms of what we get in society. And so when I think about the trends, and I think we know what some of the trends are, the more interesting question I think that comes to the fore is, what do we want to have happen, particularly with how we're going to be working in these super jobs and super teams, and how do we combine the people and the technology together? I think that's sort of how I would sort of summarize what I see the mega trends are for the white collar workforce. But it's going to be disruption and a lot of change.
So, how do you view it? So, let's say you have a typical office. Let's say return to office, put aside remote for now. You're in the office. How would that work, though? Would everybody have a ChatGPT, Claude, a Perplexity AI right at their fingertips and have their own digital agents to help out? And will that create more jobs or less jobs, or what's going to happen for there?
Okay, so you've asked like three questions in one breath, Jack. So,
Yes.
so one, even when you said, let's talk about the return to the
Yeah.
office, I you have to give me pause to say that's a really
Yeah.
good example
Yeah.
of the challenge that we have, because we have made the question of hybrid into, are we in the office, are we out of the office, and which days we're in the office, right? That is not the question for hybrid. The question is, how do we do distributed work? Whether we live near the office or in an entirely different set of time zones. How do we manage distributed work? This is what Annie Dean, a colleague
Mhm.
at Atlassian, talked about. She worked with me at Deloitte several years ago. She's helping us refocus on place to how do we manage distributed work. That's so that is the trend, the return to the office or not the return to the office? The trend is we have more options for how and where we work. How do we choose to actually distribute work and manage it so it's productive, so it's social, so it has the right impact and the right career growth for the people involved? The other part of the question that you asked was, so what is it going to look like? And the short answer is it's going to look like, I mean, I would hold up my phone, but I'm not sure you'd see it
Yeah.
with the screen. I mean, we are 100% connected to digital devices. And our digital devices and our laptops and our notebooks are now connected to all of these AI and Gen AI databases. So the short answer is yes, we will all be working constantly and passing work back and forth to different forms of AI and Gen AI. What we're trying to figure out is, how do we manage these combinations, right? How do we insert the new technologies into the workforce in the way that we work? And this is like a lot of technologies that we've seen over the last
Mhm.
tens of years or more. If we do it in a co-design way, if we do it in an inclusive way, if we involve employees and managers and specialists and our customers and our suppliers in the process, we'll probably get better results. I think the other challenge about the speed challenge is a really big one, right? And I really like to get into some perspectives on why it's so challenging to change as fast as we're trying to change. And I'm sort of moving the question from, are we all going to be working with AI, which the answer is yes, to how do we deal with the big change issues that we have, right? And that really will come down to the two big change questions. I'm not inventing this. One of my colleagues at Columbia Business School, Todd Jick, teaches an advanced class on change management. He says, look, the two challenges are that people are unwilling to change and that they are unable to change. And if you want, we can go into sort of how does that apply directly to what we're seeing in terms of how AI is being used in the workforce.
To add on to that, there's this fear that a lot of people have that their jobs will be disrupted or lost. Do you think that's the case? Goldman, a little, you know, at the beginning stages of AI was like, oh my gosh, 300 million jobs be lost or degraded. That kind of, I think they changed their mind a little bit on that. But do people have to worry that they'll lose their job? Or if they're smart and know how to leverage AI, that not only could they keep their job, but even do better? What do you think about that?
Well, there's this question has been front and center
Mhm.
since we started talking about digital 15 years ago, right? Digital really started 2007, 2008, and then sort of AI popped up really in 2012 and 2013, and then in 2022 it was Gen AI. And people much smarter than me have said, look, it's not about whether AI is going to replace you. It's whether somebody working with AI is going to replace you. And Anish Raman from LinkedIn said, it's not whether or not you change jobs, but the fact is your job is going to change on you. right? I heard a statistic the other day that said 80% of the traditional jobs that we have today are going to be radically redesigned by the year 2030. So it's not about whether you're going to lose your job. The job that you are doing today will not exist in the form that you've been doing it in the next couple of years. And I would say with some, I hesitate to say certainty, by 2030, right? So you will have a job, but your job will be different, right? Your job will be more dynamic. Your job will be less prescribed. It will be look less like a traditional job description, which is a set of tasks and a set of processes that you actually work through. It will be more project oriented. It will be more relationship oriented. These are human things. That's a really good thing. I think where we're having a challenge is shifting from, is this a substitution question or is this an augmentation question, right? And so much of the way that we've looked at business for the last 120 years, going back to Frederick Taylor and scientific management, has been about mechanizing work, including mental work, and trying to substitute technology and capital for the work that we're doing. So the short version of advice that I give people is be prepared to have a portfolio career. Be prepared in the 21st century when we have this incredible longevity dividend out there, that if you're 20 years old and you're starting in the workforce in the 2020s, 24, 25, you can expect, God willing, to live to be 100. You may have a working career of 50 or 60 years. You may have 12 or 14 jobs. You may have 5 or 7 careers. How do we prepare ourselves for that? And how do we, as businesses, create an environment where people can have a multi-chapter career in the organization? That gets me excited. It's not about whether I'm going to lose the job that I thought I was going to have. It's pretty clear that the work you're doing in its current form, and there are some exceptions to this, but they're relatively small. But for many of us, this is a grow and adapt exercise over the next few years. And certainly if you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and you're thinking about the next few decades, it's a multi-chapter game. It's not a once and done. It's not getting on a ladder. It's not getting on an escalator.
So the way you're positioning, it sounds pretty positive. So it sounds like you're optimistic about how this is all going to play out.
Am I optimistic? I think there is an optimistic scenario, right? But there are a few things that worry me. They all have to do with mindsets. If as I look at over the last couple of decades, the work that I've done, it's coincided with some of the really great ideas in management and economic thinking. Carol Dweck's The Growth Mindset, the introduction of behavioral economics and understanding cognitive biases. That's the sort of background to the way that I'm thinking about this optimistic question. If we have a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, I think there's an opportunity to be very optimistic. I think many business leaders and even public policy leaders do not have growth mindsets. They have fixed mindsets. Yes, there are trade-offs and we need to focus on them. But if we view what we can do as organizations and individuals and teams as something that's expanding and not fixed, I think that's very powerful. The other concern that I have, that sort of mutes my optimism, Jack, is something that I've been reading about and focusing on in the last couple of months. It's from the work of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, sort of the early, really among the earliest pioneers in behavioral economics. Of course, Danny Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in economics, which was a little bit of a surprise to him because he's always been a psychologist. He was never an economist. Amos Tversky didn't win the prize because he died a few years before the prize was awarded. And one of the unique factors of the Nobel Prize is you have to be alive to win the prize, even if the work that you're doing is being recognized. But one of the things that they talk about is the availability heuristic, right? And the availability heuristic is the idea that when confronted with a problem, we often go to the most obvious and the most familiar ways of solving a problem as a way of thinking about how we're going to deal with it in the future. So the availability heuristic is another way of saying, we have a problem, let's go back and try something that we did before. Let's go back and optimize the tools and the processes that we have, right? Hopefully this point is coming clear. And I think the challenge for the problems that we have today is that some of them can be solved by tightening the screws on what we've been doing for the last 20, 30, 40 years. Many of the problems require new approaches, new mindsets, and new thinking. So in order to be optimistic, I think we need to be thinking more creatively, in a more growth-oriented way, and a little bit beyond an optimization mindset, and a little bit more towards an actual creation mindset. I'm not sure I'm explaining this well, but to be optimistic, I mean, one of the ways that I sometimes discuss it in my work at Gloat is to change the game, you need to make game-changing moves, right? To be optimistic about the future, we need to do some new and different things, and we can go into what some of those are, obviously.
So what do you think with this trend of Elon Musk and the Doge kind of, let's see how we could cut costs and what have you? Is that part of, I'm not sure if that's where you think it's going, but that's one aspect of people trying to make a difference and pushing things forward. Is that part and parcel of some of the things that may happen?
Yeah, so Elon Musk is a very interesting character in this story. And it's interesting to hear someone like Elon Musk talk about efficiency, because part of what Elon has done as one of the most successful business entrepreneurs in history is he is a creator. And his focus has been on creating and new value. And does he do that in an efficient way? I'm pretty clearly he does, right? But he finds amazing ways to build what I've called super teams, right? People and technology actually working together, whether that's in the electrification businesses that he's in, including Tesla, whether that's in the space capabilities that he's built. These are not optimization games. They are done efficiently, but the core of what I see Elon Musk doing that is exciting is he is creating new capabilities and new industries, right? And yes, there's an element of this that is creative destruction, which is in order to do that, we probably have to stop doing some things we're doing before. We probably need to have fewer internal combustion engines and more hybrids and electric vehicles. But Elon Musk's focus historically was not on making the traditional automotive industry more efficient. It was on creating those new ways of working in terms of electrification, space travel, and et cetera. So look, we've had multiple efforts in the federal government. When Al Gore was vice president, he led a reinventing government initiative under President Clinton. There's a very positive history of looking at how we can be more efficient. I think there are opportunities for the federal government to use technology much more innovatively than they are today. But I don't think these are slash and burn cutting programs. I think they are reinvention and technology programs that are going to take some time in order to implement. So when I hear Elon Musk, I go to Elon Musk and look at what he's done in the commercial sector. That's what really excites me. I think doing things like that in the government sector will be very positive, but the focus is not on efficiency. The focus is on creative destruction, but really on the creation part, less on the destruction part.
Yeah, when you say creative destruction, a lot of the people who follow this podcast are in the tech space. They're in
Mm.
FANG, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft. And recently, there's a lot of talk about AI is kind of encroaching on, their roles. And these are people who are, you know, mid 20s, early 30s who are making 300, 400, 500, 600, $700,000 a year. And all of a sudden it's like, oh no, what's going to happen? Is that what you mean? Like there's going to be this kind of, some sort of, destruction along the way that maybe you're not going to have a 22-year-old making $500,000 at Meta and something's going to change there. Is that sort of one of the aspects that could kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
take place? But then they'll learn
So
other skills too, because now you have what, quantum computing. So maybe you got to go into that space instead of just working at Meta. Is that how like the yin and yang of seeing these things change?
yeah, I mean, there's an interesting historical perspective to, and one of my first university degrees is in history. There was an article that Gary Hamel wrote, I think about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, in Harvard Business Review. And the article in one sentence is the notion that if you are in a traditional industry, there is a Silicon Valley innovator who's got a gun pointed at your head, right? And they are going after your business, but they're going to do it entirely in a digital way, entirely in they're going to do it on the cloud. They're going to do it using AI. Again, this is what's happened over the last 20 years. And you need to be prepared for that. And either you're going to disrupt yourself or someone is going to take your business. What AI and Gen AI are doing perhaps is the same thing, but today the gun is pointed at the head of anybody who's in technology, right? Because what we're doing now, there are people in other parts of Silicon Valley or other parts of the world who are basically saying, how does our team use the new technologies that we have to do what we've been doing in the tech industry for the last 20 years, right? So it's an historical wave. It's sort of the circle has
Mhm.
now come around. And when there are waves of disruption, this is my observation, it's the value creators that really get the benefit, right? And what are the value creators doing? They're inventing new industries and new ways of working, right? So if you're interested in being an entrepreneur, in innovating, and using the combinations of people's strengths and technology strengths together in new ways, this is I'll go back to your question, this is a time to be optimistic. It's very hard to find a steady state. So I have an image that came from a conversation with Tom Friedman, I don't know, half a dozen years ago. And Tom used the expression dynamic stability, which almost sounds like an oxymoron, right? Dynamic stability. And he
Mhm.
says, dynamic stability, like the stability you get when you're riding a bicycle, right? And I think that's maybe a way of thinking about the world that we're in, right? We need to constantly be moving. We're stable if we're in motion. If we stop and we fix ourselves either in an industry or a position, then we're at risk. And this really is sort of the heart of what we've been thinking about at Gloat, the startup I've been working with for the last 3 or 4 years, which is when people and organizations are in motion, they are probably creating more value and are happier than if you're trying to defend a static position, right? So I've gone in 2 directions on this question of, that what does it mean to be a tech entrepreneur today, and how we've almost turned the tables on ourselves with the AI and the Gen AI technologies that we have.
This might not be a fair question, but for the audience, a lot of people aspire to be entrepreneurs and build startup companies. Given what you're talking about, would you have any advice where to go? Where do you see the puck going and you want to be there in front of it in terms of starting a business and given everything you're talking about, seeing how things are changing and could be disrupted to kind of get ahead of the curve and start building something that's going to be, that could lead to something very promising.
Well, I was going to say that's the $64,000 or the $60 million. You can put the numbers on it, and
Right.
people listening to our conversation can. Um, well, I am an entrepreneur and an innovator. I'm working
Mm-hmm.
a startup with the Gloat leadership. Um, and I think the suggestions that I have
Mm-hmm.
is to do two things. One is, and this goes back to the work that, again, I would like to come into some of the other things that we're doing at Gloat, what we're seeing about skills, what we're seeing about mobility. But this comes back to, it needs to be clear what business problem and what consumer problems we are solving in the startup and the entrepreneurial activities that we're involved in. Simply being interesting and simply doing something faster and better may not be enough for it to become a viable business or a business that can scale. So others have said, including my friend Josh Burson, it's better to fall in love with the problem than to fall in love with the technology. And I would agree with him on that. I think when we are applying technologies and combinations of technologies, including AI and Gen AI and digital and cloud, to solving specific problems in specific industries and specific verticals, and we're able to attach a clear both financial and social benefit, sort of a consumer surplus benefit to it, it's really valuable. I think one of the challenges that we're having today for startups is there are a number of startups that I think are too focused on the technology and aren't focused enough on the problems that they're trying to solve. And I'm not the first to say that there are others who are probably better, and the whole VC industry hopefully is better at giving advice on this question.
And to just dial it back a little bit, in terms of Gloat, maybe would you be able to share a little bit about what you're doing there? And for people who may not be aware of Gloat, what it's all about, and give a little color and context of what you do and how does Gloat help people?
Yeah. Sure. So Gloat is a startup. It was started in Israel in 2016 by three of our incredible founders, Ben Ruveni, Danny Steinberg, and Amakai Schreiber. And we originally were focused on the question of how do we help engineering talent in Israel find really good jobs in Israel and around the world. So effectively, we started with what you might think of as a dating site to help engineers find jobs in other companies. A couple of years into that, we're having this discussion with some of the biggest companies in the world, a consumer products company, an electrical products company. And they said, this is really interesting. Maybe we should be applying this idea of this kind of a market inside our organization, not just connecting people from the outside into our organization. And sort of really in 2018, we feel like we were one of the pioneers of the idea of an internal talent marketplace, right? And we started with the idea of how can we help the employees in a company find internal opportunities and internal jobs as easily inside the organization as they can find them outside the organization, right? And study after study, and I did these studies at Gloat, I did them when I was a Deloitte partner leading our research. When you survey employees and you ask them the question, is it easier to find a good, challenging job inside your company versus outside your company? The overwhelming percentage of employees have said for many years, it's much easier to find a job outside. There's information. I can go to LinkedIn. I can go to the different external talent sites. Not only is it visible that I know what the opportunities are, but the culture and the organization practices are actually stacked against internal mobility historically. We have talent hoarding. We have all sorts of incentives that cut against that. So we started in 2018 with this idea of the talent marketplace. we've been implementing it with global companies all around the world across all industries, with very positive results. So it helps people find internal jobs, internal projects. We've created internal gig markets where you can do projects within your own company. We've connected learning and mentors into a marketplace. What we had before we had marketplaces, Jack, was we had bureaucracies, right? We had management processes run by HR that literally moved people around mechanically, individually, moving from job to job. And we had this idea that careers were ladders and careers were linear. And so one of the earliest use cases for us was from Schneider Electric, who's one of our founding clients, co-designers. And their problem was that people were leaving because they couldn't find jobs inside Schneider Electric, even though there were multiple career tracks in the organization. So that's really where we were founded, on this idea of internal talent markets, internal career markets. And what we recognized was that by focusing on internal career and internal talent markets, the unit of analysis we used to do this was really skills and aspirations. So we developed a whole set of skill engines. We could infer the skills people had. We can infer the skills people needed. We knew and asked people what their aspirations were. So we found that we had a marketplace, and then we had all this skills data that was being generated by it. And that got us into the whole area of skills analytics, and then new ways of doing workforce planning based on skills. So here we are 7, 8 years later, and we've gone from a talent marketplace focus to building a platform, basically, that connects talent markets, career markets, skills, jobs, and projects in organizations. So that's a very sort of quick overview about what we've been doing in the market. And one of the ways we know that we're doing a good job is that the big HR tech companies and many of our competitors are copying what we're doing, and they're trying to do something very, very similar. And I think that's one of the ways that you know that you've created a category, is when everyone says, yeah, we're a talent marketplace, we're a career marketplace, we're a skills engine as well. So it's a very interesting place to be right now, because as we were talking a few minutes ago about how quickly work is changing and how adaptive the workforce needs to be, markets and internal marketplaces and internal skills programs are much faster moving than the traditional programs that we've had. And I think that's why there's so much excitement about it right now in the market.
And Jeff, so just so I understand it seems to me what you're saying is that you offer Gloat offers this platform. So let's say I'm at ABC Widget Company International, and I like my job, but I don't necessarily want to leave, but I want to see something. Maybe I could do something internally. So you would have this talent platform to maybe raise your hand. And let's say from a management consulting perspective, you're a management consultant saying, hey, I'm working on compliance, but I really want to try something different. Can I raise my hand and say, hey, I think I have the skills and ability, and maybe AI could find it for you, to say I could pivot to doing a different type of management consulting and take my career to that next level. And that's just one example. Is that somewhat what it is, that you could find the talent within your organization? And this way, the company doesn't have to worry about people, top players, A+ players leaving to go somewhere else because they feel they don't have any room to grow. This way, you could look and view and see, hey, how can we help elevate the people within the organization to find the jobs they want and to take the career to the next level? And then I'd imagine, you didn't mention this, but I guess that that's a great thing for the mindset of the people, because then they feel, hey, HR, the company's looking after us. They want us to grow and blossom within the organization. And that makes them more motivated to stay there and to work harder, because they'll know they can kind of, they're being looked after to grow their career. Is that kind of sort of how it works?
That's not only kind of sort of, but what you've touched on are there are probably more than 4. But again, I was a management consulting partner for 25 years. So when if I put things in matrices or 2x2s or lists of 5, that's the way I was trained. That's the way I was think. That's the way I think. And if we had a whiteboard here, Jack, I'd be writing on the whiteboard. But there are 4 big problems that we're talking about here, and they really they're highly integrated. One is giving our employees the opportunity to grow in multiple directions within our enterprise, within our ecosystem, right? Because people want to grow. It's one of the #1 reasons that people leave organizations. That's what Schneider Electric saw. That's what many companies see, which is they're looking for opportunities to grow in their company. So one of the problems that we're helping companies solve is, can you create a strategy in your program that says one company, right? Multiple careers, and in a meaningful way, help people find multiple careers in your company, and then letting them find ways of exploring what those options are. So the example you use, and I love it, I'm in procurement and I want to be in marketing. I'm in sales and I want to be in sustainability. What are the opportunities? What are the roles in my company that are in the sustainability area? What are the projects in the area? And maybe I'm in marketing. Can I spend some time spending 4 or 6 hours a week as a marketer on a sustainability project to get to know what's going on in the sustainability area, to start building a network with the sustainability team, to identify and to know what are the skills and experiences that are needed and expected for people who are doing different jobs and different work in the sustainability area. Before Gloat, people had no way of seeing that. It wasn't visible, right? So that's #1. #2 is, and it goes back to the first part of our conversation, when things move this fast, jobs become obsolete and new jobs are on the rise. One of the problems that challenges that companies are facing is when things are moving this quickly, jobs and work is being sunset and jobs and work are on the sunrise, right? We talk about sunset jobs, jobs that are becoming obsolete, sunrise jobs, jobs that are and work that's becoming more important. One of our customers, Standard Chartered, a financial services company based in London, their chief strategy and chief talent officer is Tanuj Kapilashwamy. And she and Ravin Jasuthasan, is a senior partner at Mercer, wrote a book called The Skills Powered Organization. But one of the core stories here is the leadership team working with Tanuj at Standard Chartered, looking at the future of their businesses in financial services and recognizing that they had something like 14,000 jobs that were effectively sunset jobs. These are jobs that were going to be in some way obsolete or substantially restructured in the next 5 to 10 years. They had another, and I think I have the numbers right, 6,000 or 9,000 jobs that were sunrise jobs. These were jobs and work that needed to be done because of the growing areas of their business. So the question became, if we have 14,000 people who are in sunset roles and we have 6,000 or 9,000 new profiles that we need to fill, what do we do about it? Do we fire 14,000 people and hire 6,000 or 9,000 people? Or do we create some way of redeploying and reskilling people to go from sunset to sunrise? This is the exercise they did. This is the kind of exercise that companies do with Skills Planner and the capabilities we have in our skills and our talent marketplace. But what they found was that it was about $49,000 cheaper to go the redeployment and the reskilling route than to go the restructuring and the talent acquisition route, right? And I think this is the other side. One side, we talked about the employee side. How do I grow? How do I have multiple careers? What companies are trying to figure out is, how do they solve their sunset to sunrise problem? How do they solve these skills are becoming obsolete and these skills are on the rise? And historically, we've done that by going to the marketplace, by recruiting the skills that we need. But when the world moves this fast, we are not producing enough people with the new skills. So companies need to be doing it themselves. And this is sort of one of the shifts of the last, I guess it's now 26, 27 years. Our colleagues at McKinsey wrote a book in 1998 called The War for Talent. We still talk about the war for talent, but the book was written before the digital age. The book was written before the AI and the Gen AI revolution, right? So we're in a world where, yes, of course, a talent acquisition is important, but the war has moved from the war to acquire talent to the war to develop talent. And that's this whole sunrise, sunset piece. The third, and I'll try to summarize them. The third big business problem is productivity, right? How do we get our people to be more productive? And what we are seeing is companies are streamlining and restructuring. That's a euphemism for letting employees go. And when we do that, one of the ways we can improve productivity is through reskilling and redesigning the work, not just into jobs, but also into projects. So companies are driving productivity by using internal talent markets. And of course, the other category that we're looking at is how do we manage workforce risk? If your board is being asked by your shareholders and your stockholders about all the questions that we've just talked about, right? Do you have a strategy to keep your skilled workforce in place? Do you have a strategy to move from obsolete skills to skills on the rise and critical skills in the future? Do you have a skills strategy is one of the board workforce risk issues that's being raised right now. So these are the kind of business problems that we're trying to solve and address by thinking not about the functionality of a talent market or a skills analytic tools, but what are where are we trying to move the needle, if you will, in terms of business results and business impact? I'll take a breath.
But that's great. And let's do this because we kind of did it backwards, or I did it backwards, because I wanted to jump in to get a vibe of what's going on in the market, the future of work, all that kind of cool stuff. And I'm glad you were able to discuss it. But let's get to know you a little bit more. So maybe because your background to me is crazy. You've been all over the world as a management consulting person and just living in everywhere. That's wild. So maybe can you share a little bit about your 30 years of management consulting and what you do, what you did as a management consultant, and how did your family cope with you always being in another country?
So, well, most of the time my family, almost like the entire time my family was with me. So
Really?
it's an interesting question because in some ways it's easy to tell the story now that I know the middle and the end versus just from the beginning. So, I graduated from university like a lot of people. I was 21 years old. And my first degree is in intellectual history, the history of social and political thought. And I mean this when I say the most useful of degrees, because when the World Economic Forum tells us what are the most important skills for the next few years, the skill that comes at the top is almost always critical thinking and the ability to frame and think about what are the right questions to ask, what are the right problems to solve. And then I worked for a foundation for a year in Washington, the Robert F. Kennedy Memorial Foundation, which has since evolved into some other activities. And I was thrown into a project that was asked the question, what is federal youth policy in the United States? Okay, this was 1980, 1981. This is also the time that Ronald Reagan comes in, he brings in David Stockman, they go through and they start slashing programs. It looks a little bit like Doge, by the way, what's happening. And so we set up a team of college and high school analysts to study federal youth policy. And one of the things we looked at was, where is the federal government spending money on people between 0 and 22? And we basically said one way to understand policy is to look at how we're spending money. So here I am, 22 years old, running a research center operation. And we did a series of reports on a variety of programs, the Peace Corps, the Young Adult Conservation Corps, VISTA, and some others. And it was during that writing of the report on the Peace Corps, this is 1981. The Peace Corps was 20 years old at the time. And I met all these Peace Corps volunteers, all these people running the Peace Corps programs. This was the personal growth experience for me. And every one of them said the most fantastic thing I ever did in my life, being a Peace Corps volunteer. So I joined the Peace Corps after a year, 15 months as a fellow at this foundation. And I went to Nepal. By the way, I had to look up Nepal in the encyclopedia, right? Because there was no internet, right? So I went to the end volume of the encyclopedia, saying, Nepal, so where is Nepal? And I read 4 pages in the encyclopedia about Nepal. And I went off to become a math science teacher in Nepal for 27 months. And then came upon the idea that I really probably shouldn't waste my time in law school. There's nothing wrong with law school. So I had this idea of going to business and public policy school because I wanted to sort of think through institutional problems for the next few years. And then after that, I spent about a year in investment banking, and then I moved into management consulting. The point is, in most of my 20s, I was on a gig with a foundation doing research on the federal government. I spent 27 months teaching math science in a village in Nepal. I spent 6 months traipsing around Asia and Europe before I came back to go to graduate school. I did 2 different graduate programs. And then at 29, I started my sort of formal work experience, right? But I had that portfolio of experiences already. When I got married, I've been married, was married to the same woman for 30 years. I have 2 daughters, but now I'm on a second marriage. I married a woman who had been a Peace Corps volunteer. We knew that we wanted to explore the world. So we went to Nairobi, Kenya. Our first daughter was born in Nairobi. We went from Nairobi to Moscow, where I helped set up the Peace Corps. Then I rejoined consulting, and I helped Pricewaterhouse and PricewaterhouseCoopers set up what they were doing. It was really, for some reason, and this is early 1980s, I felt that I had the opportunity to be curious and to explore the world, right? And the people around me were people who had similar views. So my daughters were brought up. One was born in Kenya. The other's born in the United States. They were brought up in Belgium. They finished school in India. So it's been very much part of sort of my upbringing. The amount that I learned from that, it's very hard to even summarize it. But relative to today's conversation, I'll summarize it this way. Having had the opportunity to live in Kenya, live in Israel, live in Nepal, live in India, live in Belgium, live in Russia, and a few places here in the US. I think that's where I've lived. I think I've covered most of the major countries. What I've come to understand is the importance of culture and identity, but also how deep and rich the global talent pool is, right? And it's amazing, right? What I've seen in India. I spent 5.5 years in India with Deloitte, both working with Indian companies and global companies, watching the growth of the India IT sector and professional services sector. Amazing. What I saw living and working with colleagues in Israel, living and working with colleagues in Kenya, this deep understanding of how rich the global talent pool is. And I think companies that are thinking about that will have a unique advantage. And it's not easy if you're returning to the office, just to go back to our earlier discussion, Jack. If we're returning to the office, I don't know if we're going to be able to capture the possibilities of the sort of global talent networks that we have. And again, this ties back to what we're doing at Gloat, because we're trying to help companies manage these distributed workforces and capture the capabilities of their workforce wherever they are. It's been the privilege of my life to live in this many places and to have friends in the number of countries that I do.
Well, that's great. I love your backstory. It sounds so exciting. Now you're making me want to travel. I'm getting the itch to say I gotta go see more places. You know, my it's interesting. My whole family, they love traveling. That was their thing. You know,
Mhm.
like my mom, my aunts, my uncle, they all like that was their thing. They were teachers, but they loved traveling. So every time they were off, and they would come, you know, when I was a kid, they would always come back and talk about, oh, we were just in New Zealand, oh, we were here, we were there. And it's exciting. It's awesome. And I imagine for your kids, that must have been such a wonderful time to see all these different countries and meet all different types of people. That's fantastic. So, so
Well, it
this
was,
is,
and
yeah.
and, and a quick story about my younger daughter. About 4 years after college, applied to the Peace Corps.
Mhm.
Got into the Peace Corps. Uh, she got into the Peace Corps, and then she was deployed to do training in Madagascar in February of 2020. So she was there, I think, for 4 or 6 weeks. COVID breaks out around the world. They brought every Peace Corps volunteer, every trainee, every staffer back to the United States. And now I think a couple of years ago
Mhm.
they restarted it. But I think the comfort and the interest in being able to work with teams and people and customers around the world is absolutely critical. And I think it's the other side of the discussion that we've been
Mhm.
having. So I'm sort of trying to shape a globe in my hand as we're talking. And part of shaping the globe is thinking about the globe in terms of a technologically, as Tom Friedman says, a hyper-connected world. And quantum computing simply means to me not only a hyper-connected world, but a hyper-connected world that is moving much faster with orders of magnitude more computing power, which in sense is very positive in terms of energizing this globe. But it's the connecting the people. It's building global teams, right? It's building this distributed global workforce, right? Which is so far from the return to the office, which in my mind is a fixed mindset,
Mhm.
right? So the trends are faster, people working with technology, creating value, not fixed mindset, growth mindsets, right? And then it really comes back to, and this is sort of my concluding observation is really my starting observation, which is we can talk about the trends, but what's really interesting are the decisions and the choices. Where do we want to drive the human machine collaboration in the next few years? How do we develop entry-level roles for people when entry-level roles in some ways are going away because of what
Mhm.
technology is doing? These are choice questions. And I think if we spend more time on the choice questions and less time asking what's the trend and how do I get on the trend line versus where do I want the trend line to be taking me? What value do I want to create for my employees? What value do I want to create for my shareholders? What value do I want to create for my customers? What value do I want to create for the communities I'm in? I think that's where some of the really key questions in our activities are going to lie. And in the teaching that I get to do at Columbia, both with MBAs and executives, these are the questions that I think we're really trying to get people to focus on, which is if these are the trends, what are the choices and where do we want to drive this? And at Gloat, we're saying we want to put people and organizations in motion. We want people to have more opportunities. We want companies to create more value. We want people to have really exciting, fulfilling careers, if possible, in the same company, but if not, wherever they're going to be working in the world.
Well, that's great. I really appreciate you taking the time out, Jeff, and you gave some valuable information about what's going on in the market, where things are going, giving ideas for people, guidance, advice. So this is fantastic. So I really appreciate you taking time out, you know, to share your thoughts and your insights. And I think the audience will be really happy and uh, excited to watch it and listen to it and check it out. So thank you so much, Jeff. This was awesome.
Thank you, Jack.
Thanks.